Okay, so let's talk about equivalent dose. So the unit for equivalent dose is the sievert. That's the base unit. But it's such a small quantity that we're talking about. In order to avoid all those leading zeros, we're going to be discussing it as millisieverts. Okay? So just to refresh, the sievert is equal to 1 gray times the weighting factor of the particle. Okay? So whatever is absorbed by the body would be the particle. Okay? So if we go back and we look at our weighting factors, for photons, it's 1. For electrons, it's 1. For neutrons, it can be anywhere between 2 to 20. Okay? So for the sake of the argument, let's talk about a weighting factor of 1. Okay? So photons and electrons. When you have 1 sievert, you have 1,000 millisievert. Okay? So let's look back at what the sievert is made out of. Okay? So we know that there's 100 centigrade in a gray. Okay? So we can say that the sievert is equal to 1 gray times the weighting factor. We can also say that the sievert is equal to 100 centigrade times a weighting factor. Okay, we're still saying the same thing, but we've just changed our unit to the centigrade. Okay? Okay, so when we're talking about the rem, we're in a different system. We're in the traditional system. So the rem measures equivalent dose, and the sievert measures equivalent dose. But these two units are not the same size. Okay? So if we remember that there's 100 centigrades that make up a sievert, keep that in mind. For rem, a rem is 1 rad times the weighting factor. Well, we know that a rad is equal to a centigrade, so they're the same size. But when we look at the sievert is equal to 100 centigrade times the weighting factor. Okay, so we know that the sievert is a much larger unit than the rem. How much larger? By 100. Okay, because there's 100 more units within it than is within the rem. Okay, and if we start to talk about millisieverts, we know that 1 sievert is 1,000 millisieverts. So let's look at the difference if we went between sieverts and rems. So if I'm given 50 millisieverts and I want to know how many rem that is, remember we're crossing systems, okay? So we're looking at how many rems and how many millisieverts, which is going in between the traditional and the SI units, okay? So let's keep in mind, we're just going to go with the fact that our weighting factor is 1. So we're either talking about photons or electrons, just to keep things simple here, okay? I just want to show you the relationship in size of these two things, okay? So if we start with 50 millisievert, okay, and we put our conversion factor, so there's 1,000 millisievert in 1 sievert, okay, and there's 1 sievert and 1 gray, okay, and there's 1 gray in 100 centigrade, okay. And then we go a little bit farther here and we have 1 centigrade is 1 rad. Okay. All right, so I ran out of room here, but 1 rad, if I would put it right here, but 1 rad is 1 rem. Okay. So just imagine this is on the end of my equation here. So let's look back at our units. Millisieverts crosses out with millisieverts. Sieverts crosses out with sieverts. Grays cross out with grays. Centigrays cross out with centigrays. Rads cross out with rads, and that leaves us with rem. It's hard to read, but that's a rem. Okay, so all we have left to do now is to do our multiplication. So we're going to multiply 50 by 100, okay, and then we're going to divide by 1,000. So the answer is going to be 5. Okay, so there are 5 rem in 50 millisieverts. Okay, so what we find is that there are 10 millisieverts in a rem as long as the weighting factor is 1. Okay, so remember that. As long as the weighting factor is 1, there are 10 millisieverts in a rem. Now, where do we get that from? Let's go back and look at our equation, okay? That's because there are 100 centigrade in a sievert, but we're not going to use the sievert. We're going to use the millisievert, okay? So if you take, if you convert that 100 centigrade and then into the millisievert, that's a difference of 10. Between centi and milli, that's a difference of 10, okay? And so the rem is on par with the centigrade, so it's that size unit. And when you look at it with between the rem and the millisievert is a smaller unit because it takes more of the millisieverts to equal the rems, okay? Now, the only reason that I'm going through this step is to show you more information about that chart for occupational workers, okay, and for the lay public. So those dose equivalencies for the year, okay, and the tissue equivalencies for the year, because they put these two units side by side, okay. And it makes it a little confusing because you see two different numbers. But now you can see how these numbers relate to each other. So 1 rem is going to be equal to 10 millisieverts as long as the weighting factor is 1. Okay? When it comes to memorizing that chart, because that's what it's going to come down to, I want you to learn those numbers in millisieverts, okay? Because this is the unit that we use. All right. However, you need to know where we came from and what, and this whole process is just to explain that. Okay. So we used to use rem, but now we use the millisievert. Okay. So if it asks you on your test, how many rem make, what's the, maybe it gives you rem and it asks you what is this in millisieverts, then you can say 1 rem is 10 millisieverts, okay? I can't guarantee you what your board is going to look like. I don't have any access to it. However, I'm preparing you for whatever you might see, okay? So I hope this helps. If you have any more questions, please put them, please email me, or we can ask them in class, okay? But I hope this helps too.